Hello and welcome back to the Art of We podcast.
Welcome back. Unless you haven't heard it before, then this might be your first one, your first
Could be your
episode.
first one.
And we're psyched to have you. Either way, we're so psyched. Thanks for joining us.
Today we want to talk about when we're not on the same page about a decision we're making or something we're choosing to do, and give you a few tools that may help navigate these challenging moments together. You want to pick the first moment that we're going to share today?
I think one of our first really big conflicts around decisions or choices was when I first moved in with you. And I had a bunch of these mugs. If you've heard all of our episodes, you've probably heard this before, but if you haven't heard, then this will be a new one. But I had all of these really beautiful mugs, colorful, different sizes. They all had different meanings. And when I moved in to your house, well, you really didn't like my mugs at all. And you had these very pristine, beautiful, monotone, same color, same exact size, same exact shape mugs that you really liked to have in your cupboard. And so that was the first thing that I actually remember us being like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, neither of us want to back down on this one. Do you remember that?
Definitely. Yeah, for sure.
What's your recollection of how we handled that?
Well, I think it got pretty challenging is what I remember. I remember your explanation helped me openness to a wide variety of different tea mugs.
What was my explanation?
You elaborated on the memories and the stories that were behind each one of those pieces of ceramic, and that there was something meaningful to you about having variety of different things that you could choose from based on what your mood was or what you were wanting that day.
Totally. It felt like a really kind of like feminine, masculine moment, like the different colors and ranges and textures and all these things that I loved. And, you know, you liked this really kind of non-colorful, same color, I guess. It's white. White is a color. And so basically, you know, I think it was tension for us because it was your kitchen. Really, I was moving into your house. And here was this woman who's like bringing shit in that you didn't want her to bring in. And so it was uncomfortable for us. And I think that the way I remember us resolving it is that I had one shelf and you had one shelf. And I think that the whole theme actually of this episode is how do you actually create a win-win situation when there are differences and strong differences, and yet you need to make a decision together because you're in it together. And so when I look back at all the different times that we've had strong differences, what I feel like we've really walked away with is a win-win. Or one of us is compromising unconsciously because when we're looking back at our history and being like, where are the places where we've had a hard time really finding alignment around decisions? It's kind of hard to find places, which is kind of surprising.
It's nice that there haven't been too many of those.
It's really nice. But
yeah,
then
I think a lot. I think these stylistic differences are sometimes a source of a lot of conflict for people. Another place that we could look deeper, and I've found some resolution of some of these differences in myself with you, is when I look at where does that preference or that rigidity come from? You know, why am I so attached to that way of doing things? And in the case of the mugs, I can trace it back to growing up in a home that felt really cluttered and disorganized and full of random stuff. And so the order and the clarity of just having the same mug times 8 makes
is
things
probably
feel
settling to
more
you.
relaxed. Yeah.
Yeah, you feel more relaxed, more settled.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense about growing up in a home like that you actually want to have a different experience.
But that doesn't mean that I need to rigidly hold on to that perspective, and I don't need to be living in a reactive opposition to something that happened before. I'd rather explore the edge of freedom from the pattern and freedom from the reaction to the pattern.
When I notice me thinking back to times that I was rigid about something in my lifetime, whether it's with you or somebody else, what I notice is there's something underlying that for me also, which is more of like this, are you going to get your need met or am I going to get my need met? It's very much of a me versus you. And I think that's something that we've mastered pretty well, is not that we haven't fallen down, but is this more we perspective? And we don't have this kind of competitive vibe about who's going to get whose needs met inside of our partnership in the first place. So I think that when it comes to decision making, we're actually coming from a different place, a lot more flexibility, a lot more, well, what's the we expression here? What's the win-win expression? What's the we expression? And I think that's partially why we haven't had a lot of conflict about decision making. But when I've been in prior relationships where there is questions about, am I going to get my needs met, and there's more of this competitive vibe, I would say there was a lot more conflicts around decision making for me.
Right. Well, I think the foundational commitment that we can do more than I can supports us to live into that. It's a practice. We can do more than I can. It's not a truth that pre-exists until you practice it, and you can kind of live into it and trust it. Some of the differences are bigger than others. Like the difference around mugs was different from the time that you said you wanted a second dog, for example.
Yeah, that was a big one. So we have 2 fur babies, small ones that we totally adore. But the first one, when he came along as a puppy, it was really challenging for us to not be in a lot of rupture, conflict, different ways of styles of training and being with the dog. And it was really hard and painful for us. We made it through. And then he finally settles down and he's like a really calm dog and everything's great. And then I come along, I'm like, hey, I think Biggie Smalls needs a little sister. And I think we should get another dog. And yeah, do you want to share about your experience with that? Because you were the one who was anti second dog initially.
Well, it seems a little repetitive, but I'll say that I grew up in a world where there were a lot of animals around, let's put it that way. And it's perfect timing for a dog to be barking in the background. There were there wasn't a lot of attention paid to dog training or um, dog behavior parameters.
How many dogs did you have?
Well, we went through, I would say, maybe a dozen or more dogs from the time that I can remember until I left the house. And I don't ever remember seeing a leash anywhere in the house. So they ran around and they ran around the neighborhood. They'd be gone for days at times and nobody knew where they were or if they were alive or not. And they would come back. And it was a chaotic, kind of wild environment. And my sister and I loved animals, and it was wonderful to have the cats were, having kittens and the dogs were running around, and it was a lot. It was a lot to be with. And I think I sometimes felt like my needs got lost in all of the chaos of the environment. And so the idea of getting a second dog brought up for me a concern that, the attention that I really thrive on receiving from you was going to be divided again with another needy animal
Mm-hmm.
for a while, for more than a year. So
So
that was the thing.
how did you come to, like, what was your process? Share with the people who are listening, like, what was your process to get from that perspective to being willing to get another dog?
There were a couple of things that felt really real for me. One of them was I was operating from a scarcity and kind of defensive point of view of almost like a stinginess of believing, like I was asking myself, am I going to commit to the belief that your capacity to track me and my needs is limited so much that having a second dog's going to cut that away, or that we're not going to be able to navigate that? That was one perspective. The other perspective is that this will be a way for us to expand and hold more of, bigger family, if you will. The other thing was, do I want to be in a world where I'm saying no to a big desire that you have,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to figuring out how to be with and support a big desire that you have? And the experience that I've had of you over the time that we've been together has been, you're a huge hell yes to the things that I want to go try to do. and so much support. And not to say that it hasn't sometimes been hard for you to support me in the things, but I was also facing that is how fair am I? What am I committed to here in our relationship? Is a fairness of we support each other's fullest expression, and
Mhm.
or is it me being a stick in the mud or curmudgeon who, you know, puts a fence around my comfort and doesn't want anybody to walk on the grass in my comfort zone, you know?
Yeah.
So those were two of the things. And then the third one was we were in a conversation about how our other dog was lonely and seemed to be kind of depressed and wasn't as playful or joyful as he had been when he was little. And
Mhm.
we thought that he was really needing another furry friend to hang out with. And it was a theory, but it seemed true. And so, again, I was in the psychology of am I going to just kind of prioritize my own comfort and try to control my experience, or am I going to open up and try to go on a learning journey of how to be a bigger person for you and for him?
Yeah, and we were in a lot of conversations about this before actually aligning to do it. And we were addressing all the things that you just brought up, like the parts of you that were afraid of not getting his needs met. Like we got really into that and we flushed it out and we made agreements about us and our relationship being the primary focus and that it would be impacted for probably a year. Like, as those of you who are listening, when you have a puppy, it's a really big needy year that needs a lot of attention, and especially if you're training them and all that kind of stuff. So we were in lots of conversations about it, and we weren't willing to move forward. I wasn't willing to fulfill or like move forward and be like, okay, we're doing this unless I really felt that you were fully with me, because I knew that if I just bulldozed and like had a maybe from you or a yes that was maybe compromised, I knew that it wasn't going to be a good thing for our partnership. So for those who are listening, I just want you to know, like, we worked at this. It wasn't like a 2-minute conversation. It was a several month conversation.
Right. It takes time sometimes to get aligned.
Especially when you know it's going to have a really big impact on your system, on your family system, on how things are operating, for sure.
I think the agreements that we put in place were really, really helpful for me to get to a yes. I don't think we would have gotten there without setting those up. For example, as you said, prioritizing our we over any third party is really important to us as a general rule, but
Right.
even with a new dog in the house. And another one was getting clear based on our previous experience with the first dog that
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't going to work well for us to train the dog because our styles are so different.
Mm-hmm.
And so we made a decision that was uncomfortable, but I felt good about it, is for you to be the primary trainer of the dog and really take the lead on that.
Right. And then anytime that came up where you felt like you weren't getting your needs met or you weren't being prioritized, or there was a conflict that we had about how the dog is getting trained, we would fall back into our agreements. And it seems like because we were both such a big yes to those agreements, that it worked pretty well for us.
For sure. And it didn't prevent conflicts from happening, but it gave us a framework for navigating the conflict. So I think that's maybe one of the biggest takeaways that I would like people to hear about, is that having a solid relationship has nothing to do with whether you fight or not. It's so important to understand that in a healthy relationship, you have the tools to navigate conflict without doing harm to each other. But having a healthy relationship means that you do have conflict.
Right. It's totally so different from how I was raised.
And some people have more than others, and that's real. So I don't have a formula of, I don't think we would ever say that there's a certain amount of conflict that's the right amount to have, but it's really about how the conflict is navigated more than anything.
Totally. Why don't we take a quick break and we'll come back. We'll share one more area that I think is pretty common for people to also get into conflict about around decision making and how and what to do. And then we can share anything else that comes up for us about how we make decisions when we are not aligned. We'll be right back. We hope you're enjoying this episode. I want to take a quick break to let you know about a gift we created for you and your partner. We compiled our top 10 relationship agreements that have been so powerful in supporting the success of our partnership that we even turned them into our wedding vows. These agreements help us stay connected, growing, and thriving as a couple, and they've been critical to help us create a kind of we that's way beyond what we've ever experienced before. You can download this free gift at KristaVanderveer.com. That's KristaVanderveer.com. Also, if you enjoy our podcast, it would be so meaningful to us if you left us a rating and review. Not only does it help others find us, but it gives us critical feedback on how we're doing. Thanks in advance, and now back to the episode. Welcome back. So there's a couple more areas of conflict that have come up inside of our partnership where we haven't been aligned and we've needed to find alignment. One of them, Will, has been around our driving styles, which I just thought about. We've had some pretty big conflict about driving styles. And if you haven't already heard it, we will put the episode, we did a whole episode on how we navigated driving styles, which we came up with a we driving style. So if you're curious about that, you can check that out. I will put the episode number in the show notes and a link to that one. That was a pretty good one. But another place is around what you can kind of categorize as introvert, extrovert tendencies. And for this particular conflict, we were invited to a mastermind. And Will, I would say that you're more of the extroverty, like to network, like to socialize a lot more than I do. And I'm the type where it's like I can take certain amounts, but if our schedules and lives are super busy, I actually need a lot more time by myself to recharge and refill. And I don't know that you're exactly that way, but I think you might be coming more on my side more lately, but that's another conversation. But in this particular instance, it was a mastermind here in town where we live in Boulder, Colorado, and you really wanted to go to this mastermind. You were super psyched about it. And you wanted us to go together as a couple. And I was very resistant and I really did not want to go. It was kind of like I was almost like stomping my feet. I remember the vibe in the kitchen where I was kind of like in a little girl mode and I'm like, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. I don't want to go. And eventually we found our way. But when there's this conflict about going to an event like this, I would say we use the same framework of the win-win situation. So I remember you, Will, when you were talking about it and somehow we started getting into the conversation of, well, Krista, what would make it a win-win for you if you came with me? What do you need? What would it look like? How can we get you to feel like you're set up for success inside of this event so that we can go?
How did you answer the question?
So I think the event was like 3 hours or something like that. And I remember saying, okay, if we're going to do this, here's what I would actually really need. I need for us to check in together after an hour and see how the vibe's going, see how we're doing, see if I specifically need anything, but also you. And I needed us to stay pretty close together at that particular event. It wasn't like, hey, we walk in the door and it's like, see you later, Krista. Leave you on your own. Good luck. Like it wasn't that. And I think that was it. Those two things I really needed.
Yeah, that's for me, that always works. It seems I can't think of an example where I would not want that with you, of checking in after a period of time and staying connected during an event. I think, I'm sure there are couples who are very happy together who do things quite differently, but, they can make it their own agreements about, hey, I want to be turned loose and I'll see you in 3 hours kind of thing. And that's great too.
Totally. And there's been times when we've had more of that vibe of like, we don't really need to stay in contact and connection at this event.
Right.
But I think the point is like, if we get really honest with each other and we're not trying to be in an I space competing against needs, how can we set it up so it's both a win-win for each other? And can we be flexible, like you were talking about in our system, to view it from a more we perspective? There's even another thing there that night that happened for me, which is like, well, what does the we need? And I really wanted also for you to get your need met. And if I asked what the we needed, it needed for you to get out and get to this mastermind. And you wanted me with you. So there's also a bigger perspective that we can always hold when we're navigating these decisions.
And I think it's important to also practice having the courage to speak up about what those needs really are for it to be a win-win. I mean, obviously, if you're not honest with yourself or with your partner about what the need is, if you don't know what the needs are, it's going to be pretty damn hard for the two of you to hold what your need is. So,
Right. And then you could crash and burn the whole
right,
situation.
right,
That would not be
right.
fun.
No,
Yeah.
no. And sometimes it takes time to get really clear about what the need is. So, taking your time to do that, to take to engage that process is important. And I think the more secure you are in your partnership, the easier that process can be. But you don't get the security without practicing the challenging moments.
Yeah. It also reminds me of decisions that we've made about money and specifically around masterminds. So there's been particular masterminds, specifically more on your side, that you've been interested in joining. And of course, I want to support you. And one of our relationship agreements is to support each other's greatest expression and success. And in order to do that, like, we really want to support each other in where we find desire and excitement and what lights us up. And when we come to crossroads where there's a lot of money, or, a significant amount of money that one person wants to take and use towards part of their potential and expression and success, it's not just okay, great, go do it, because we're committed to supporting each other's success. It's also a process of, will really help me understand what this means to you, help me understand how this impacts the other areas of our life. What do I need to really support you? And a full yes, not a maybe yes, not a kind of yes, but a full yes to join this mastermind. And can we work that out together? Because if we don't do that, like you're saying, it's going to be a really challenging future. Because at some point, some part of us that was resistant to it in the first place, or a maybe yes or a no yes, if you know what I'm saying, will eventually come out in some form or another, consciously or unconsciously.
Right, right. Either it'll come out or there's going to be a lot of distance and siloing happening in the relationship. And some people out there listening might be thinking, hey, why can't I just have a higher limit on my credit card? Or why can't I'm talking about metaphorically in the relationship. Like, why do I need to check off every expenditure that's over whatever, $1,000 or something like that? And there, you can live that way. You can have separate bank accounts. You can, you know, do things that you don't check out with your partner and don't find out if how that benefits them, and how not doing the mastermind that you want to do could be a drawback to them even.
Mm-hmm.
You can have a less interdependent, less contactful partnership, but the effort that it takes to get on the same page, we feel is really worthwhile, because it means that you're both a yes to the choice that's being made in a deeper way than you could ever have if you don't need to enroll your partner in the decision.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, but having two pairs of eyes on a big expenditure can some destroy the fantasy that that expenditure is going to be a good idea before you make it.
Right.
So
Which,
you could
yeah,
choose not to do it.
right. Which is probably why that normally happens, or typically happens. The other thing too is like, let's say we decide that you're doing this mastermind, or I'm doing a mastermind that's a significant dollar, and we're a full yes. And then all of a sudden we're 6 months into the mastermind, and one of us is being impacted in a negative way as a result of, let's say, all the time and energy and effort that this is actually starting to take up. And so then it's not like, oh, I said yes in the beginning and now I'm not okay with it. It's more like, okay, shoot, I need to have this conversation with, this isn't actually feeling as good anymore. How can we figure this out together? So even if you say yes in the very beginning, if it turns to a maybe or a no, it's like you still need to address it
Definitely.
from our perspective, from the art of we perspective.
And all of those conversations are money in the bank of deeper security in your relationships. There's harder work on the front end, but there's more payoff at the back end.
Right. It's like slow down to go faster in the future.
Right.
Kind of
Right.
concept.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we hope that sharing some of the nitty-gritty of how we navigate getting on the same page with each other supports your efforts in your relationship to do the same. And we would love to hear your comments about perhaps other ways that you get on the same page with your partner, or other topics that you'd like to hear us discuss or share about. Please do leave us comments on your favorite podcast platform. And anything else you'd like to say, Krista?
As I'm thinking about the people who are listening, I could see the possibility of somebody saying to us, well, my partner isn't willing to think from a we perspective. And it's our relationship does have this kind of underlying me versus you, getting our needs met vibe to it. And if that's the case, then my suggestion would be to go back to what are we up to in partnership together? And even if you've had that conversation before, I would say have it again, because there might be some gold that you find there with each other about why there's this competing needs going on. Or you might find some gold around what really needs to be addressed between the two of you before you can align more easily in decision making. And we have a lot of different episodes that you could scroll through and just look towards like what is a we perspective, and maybe even refer your partner to one of the episodes that really resonates with you to support a we mindset. So I just want to bring that up for those of you who are potentially already in a pretty challenging partnership around this decision making.
Good idea. Glad you mentioned that.
Yeah. So, and we would love, love, love to hear from you. Please do leave us some comments. And thank you for listening, and we'll talk with you next week.
See you next time.